I think Mr. Hall raised that question or commented briefly on that, but if maybe you could expand a little bit on that and explain how that's wrapped into what we're,
well, I think
what's in the EIR.
It goes back to the history of this project, and at one point it was directed by the board that the county initiate the amendment in resource lands in general. We brought that back before you with a negative declaration. There was significant public controversy. At that point, I think the county board said we're no longer sponsoring this. It's now up to any individual applicant if they wish to pursue this and carry the burden, if you will, for any environmental impact analysis that needs to occur. If I remember correctly, we identified for the current applicants what their options were, you know, of do nothing or expand the quarry only, or rezone, apply for a rezone to industrial, or change the code. And so they had a menu, if you will, of options that they could choose. Now they have, as a private entity, have submitted an application which the county is responsible for responding to, and we've said an environmental impact report is required, and that environmental impact report is prepared. So it's not the county's objectives per se, just as if someone is proposing a subdivision, it's their objective of what they want to accomplish, and that's what's analyzed in the environmental impact report.
Why would an individual applicant, though, that wants to proceed with a site-specific project need to apply for zoning changes that would affect other areas of the county? In other words, why is it not clearly and totally site-specific, or is it?
Well, no, it's not entirely site-specific. It is to the extent that the way it's written and proposed by them, it would require a use permit and a rezoning for any particular site. So those, if anyone else wished to avail them of this zoning code amendment or combining zone that's proposed, they would have to be zoned rangeland. They would not be able to be in Williamson Act. They would have to have an active quarry. The processing would have to occur within, I think it's a half a mile of where the quarry operation was located. So if someone else met that criteria, they could come in with that request.
Thank you.
But why the other? We did give them other alternatives, and one of those was, you know, request a rezoning to industrial at this site, and there's pros and cons that go along with that, and I suspect they weighed the pros and cons, and from that menu felt that their application was the best approach for what they wish to accomplish.
Thank you.
Yeah, from a CEQA perspective, I know Ray and I have talked about this. There's been a couple of comments that there should have been a separate EIR on the zoning first, and then one on the project. Well, that would have been very clearly what's in CEQA considered segmenting the project, because there's obviously a quarry project out there. So to do a sort of program level EIR on the zoning change when you had this project sitting there, you would have had to address it then anyway. So essentially, you know, you really are following CEQA by putting them together.
Mr. Charles, in the final document, are all of the comments that have been received in writing become part of the final document?
Yes.
And your responses connected to those are part of the final document?
Right.
Good. Thank you very much.
Supervisor Colfax?
If I may come back in.
Jump right in there.
Mr. Charles, on page 175, addressing the traffic, since this was rather dramatically presented here as a concern of the public, I had experience on Highway 1, the left-hand turn situation south of the town of Mendocino, and basically what happened there was that Caltrans was not terribly convinced that the data showed that there was a problem there, but the community, after a couple of fatal accidents there, was aroused to the point that Caltrans became very responsive, and I think did an excellent job of addressing the problem there, which puts me in a position of wondering, when we look at page 175, it says planned improvements. There are no currently planned improvements to Black Bart Drive or the Highway 101 intersection. Caltrans has no improvements planned for Highway 101 in the vicinity of the Harris Quarry or Black Bart Drive intersection. Considering what was addressed here, and I thought rather well, is how do you mitigate this when Caltrans is essentially the authority here? And will Caltrans step in? When you talk about levels of service here, it seems that Caltrans has kind of an adjustable standard of performance, much as it does with regard to highway speeds. If people are driving faster, we raise the speed. It seems we raise the speed level. So I'm concerned here that how does this become? How do you, as the EIR developer, how do you mitigate it? How do you respond? Simply say the comments of people who have experience going in and out of there, and I've been in and out of there not more than a dozen times. It's no longer my district. But the question is here is, how do you address the fact that our community concerns Caltrans may have to be pushed and shoved and people do all this, but that certainly is not your responsibility as the person who is just giving us the information. So how do you come back here when you leave the room here today? Say Colfax says that is to him perhaps one of the most problematic of all matters here. You say Colfax doesn't know what he's talking about, that's a possibility. You say we can't do anything about it, Caltrans has to do something and they're not going to, that's a possibility. Or do you say, actually, it's no big deal one way or the other, which is also a possibility. None of those are going to be very satisfactory. So what do you say? And I'm taking something, I'm trying to be as concrete as possible here, but how do you mitigate that? How do you think about mitigating? I guess is more to the point.
Well, it's a great question. First of all, we look at the base case situation, which is that existing driveway with trucks. Admittedly, not as many trucks as would happen with the expansion with the proposed project, but with trucks currently pulling out, making left turns, going uphill without that refuge lane, no refuge lane coming downhill. So it's a very hazardous intersection as it stands. The applicant worked with Caltrans to get agreement, at least at a beginning level, though that Caltrans has to go through its whole process when you're going to make improvements to the state highway. That at least in principle, they agreed with this initial design improvements that they would, am I correct? Yes. So that's that part of it. The part that you bring up, though, what do you do when a registered traffic engineer says this meets safety requirements for line of sight, et cetera, and you have a public who has personal experience of the hazards with it? That's the whole point of this whole process we're going through. I can't override the technical lines and say, yes, these anecdotal things are the correct statement, but they're all part of the record now. So you as decision makers can go, all right, this is what the traffic engineers said, this is what the 30 people who live out there said, and we're going to make our decision based on all that information. I mean, I don't deny that. I'm sure it is a dangerous situation pulling in and out of that quarry.
But you would not be coming back to us in a revision, I guess, if I may, through the chair, may I pursue this just for a second here? And that is, you would not be coming back to us with your response to the public concern that we have something better to look at.
Well, we may well.
Okay, but at the moment, you're going to...
Well, all these things have to get passed by our technical